Thank you for checking out Stories of the Games We Play, Episode 2. In this episode, we cover the state of Star Wars. Please forgive the audio in this episode, as we had some audio issues, but we apologize for the inconvenience. And now, it's time to press start on Stories of the Games We Play.
That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Uh-oh. Richard.
Oh my goody, good gumdrops, my friend. I don't know how to feel after, just to kind of pick up from where we were last week. You recommended Zone of Interest to me, or The Zone of Interest to me.
Yeah.
And I want to take like 15 minutes just to decompress because I literally just finished watching it. I am so uncomfortable.
I do believe I share the same sentiment.
3, 2, 1.
You mentioned Civil War, and yeah. I was like, yeah, Civil War. I can't remember specifically. There was something that triggered a certain feeling. I don't know what we were discussing here specifically. However, that feeling that you described, my brain went straight to the Zone of Interest. And now you know.
Yeah, now I know, because I can tell you this. I watched, my intention was to watch it yesterday. I got cuddled up to it and everything like that. And from the title card, right? You got a couple of logos that come up, and then there's this lingering title card. And I had thought that something was wrong with the movie, but it had the sound design and this title card that just, I was just like, oh my goodness, what am I watching? And then I'd watched 20 minutes of it without realizing that I wasn't watching it with subtitles.
20 minutes.
I was just dumbfounded by just the audacity of this film, and just how it's playing things so cavalier with such horrific topics, with such horrific elements of our history, of our collective human history. And it feels so freaking on point with exactly the way that we as people deal with uncomfortable, not just conversations, but uncomfortable events. I think as we start the second episode of Stories of the Games We Play, the reason why you and I came up with that name is because nothing happens within a vacuum. You don't play nor engage with entertainment without some sort of context. And it's that context that fills in your experience of said entertainment, said piece of art, as we spoke about last week with The Last of Us. But at the same time, you watch this and you just realize that how comfortable we are with context.
Okay, so I often, I'm very reluctant to basically praise films like this, right? Because it's a beautiful film. You agree, yeah. Right? Amazing filmmaking. I mean, it makes you feel, right? But now you tell somebody, yo, man, there's this film. It's beautiful. It's called The Zone of Interest, and then they go watch it.
Yes.
How can you call something like that beautiful, right? It's very, what's the word I'm looking for? Is it paradoxical? Is it a paradox? I don't know. But so what happened with me was I'd heard about The Zone of Interest, right? Because I think who's the director of Civil War? Is it Alex Garland? Or was it
Alex Garland? That's right.
Right. Yeah. So him, and for whatever reason, I thought Alex Garland was the director of The Zone of Interest, because the name was buzzing around my peripheries, and I was like, okay, it's in the back of my head somewhere. And then somebody recommended it. They were like, yo, Zone of Interest. I'm like, oh, really? Okay. So there, off I go and do a little bit of research, not too much, because I'm like, yo, if somebody recommended it to me, I want to keep that mystery alive until I watch it. So I see a thumbnail of the poster, right? There's different posters because I had to find that poster thumbnail so I could send it. And in the back of my mind, I thought it was like an English spy thriller. I went into The Zone of Interest thinking I'm going to get English accents and, a very well-paced, intriguing spy story because of the suit, right? There's a white suit in the film at some point.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I'm basically looking forward to it. Very much excited. And I mean, at some point during the film, I had a decision to make inside my chest cavity. It was, if I don't finish this thing, I'm never coming back to it.
I hear you. So on that point, I thought it was a documentary. From before you recommended it, I thought it was a documentary about Auschwitz. That's my point of entry. And what's interesting is that when you recommended it, I too looked up the film and took a look at the poster and went, oh, it's a film. And funny enough, from the sort of the video case study on the death of cinematic curiosity that we both watched together, there are certain clips from it that I found intriguing. Only having watched it now, I went, oh my goodness, I was kind of like Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where I was just like, pointing at the screen, even though I watched it completely alone, where I was like, oh, that's where that's from. Because in that particular case study, they talk about this idea of being, engaging with uncomfortable art, uncomfortable cinema. And the thing for me is when I watched that first 20 minutes yesterday, the entire day today, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to go back to it. But luckily, because I knew, we had spoken about it and we were going to speak about it on this podcast, there was a yearning to watch it just from a curiosity point of view, but also at the same time, a complete uncomfortability with having to watch it. And I couldn't watch it sitting still. I must have gotten up a couple of times around and looked for every opportunity just not to watch it because, as you say, it's so brazen. But please continue.
Yeah, so I do this rocking motion when I'm uncomfortable watching something. Right? It's a bit of a cliche, but it happens. I noticed it, and there's a GIF. I think of a Korean guy on a train, and he's bawling his eyes out. I mean, he is just, I'm like, yo, I don't even want to ask what happened with this man, right?
Yeah.
After watching The Zone of Interest was the first time I've ever used that GIF.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I will send it to you because I was shell-shocked, man. I was like, what is this experience?
Yeah, because everything's so fresh for me. I haven't even reached that point yet. I'm in that silence we spoke about last week, which is just this. I'm stunned.
Okay. So if I'm gonna praise it, right, just in terms of that, this thing is exceptional because outside of the emotional. You feel very saturated by the emotions that it kind of forces you to feel, right? Unless you're a complete psychopath, right? And and I think it was only a few days afterwards where my brain is getting like little flashes of the film. And the quality of the film. I mean, it is serene in terms of certain visual aspects, right? I mean, some of the shots are actually quite beautiful. The composition, where you know, as a filmmaker, you're like, come on, guys, this is polished. This is what do they call it? Premium. Very, very good. Right?
I can't believe I'm laughing. But I hear you, because this is where also my uncomfortability came from, because it's like the beauty and the macabre just like right next to each other, and even the horrific scenes are filmed in this way where you've got like these horrific images juxtaposed against these images of beauty, and they really unnerve you, because for one reason, and you mentioned this idea of being a sociopath, right? You said sociopath or psychopath. Psychopath. And I felt a little bit like that. I felt a little bit hypocritical watching it, because I'm watching this, right? I'm watching a piece of entertainment about something that happened, you know, what is it now? Almost 70 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And I've avoided things about the Holocaust, even things like Schindler's List, for that reason. It's just because, you know, the idea that we as a species have done this multiple times, you know, with things like even the Armenian genocide, even with things like what happened in Rwanda, even things that's happening currently in Congo, what's happening in Palestine right now. You feel like you are part and parcel of the, how can I put this? The decontextualization of violence, just so that you may survive and pretend that these things are not happening in order for you to operate as a full functioning human being.
Yeah, it's a safety mechanism.
Yeah. Look, and you know, the thing is, for me, what I've come to realize, you know, last year when October 7th happened, I was glued to the television screen, glued to Twitter, glued to Instagram, as, you know, sort of the horrors of what followed started to unfold. And I fell into a deep, agonizing depression, simply because I was seeing firsthand the devastation. You know, and last week we spoke about how our lives are so utterly documented. You know, this is one of the first times that we're seeing horrific images throughout our world in real time.
Yeah.
And the zone of interest just kind of brought that to the fore for me again.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I had trouble with this you know the ticking time bomb theory of a story, where you're just on edge the whole time because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
Right? They managed to do this so well, and there was no real ticking time bomb. Essentially, it's just what I anticipated the next scene was going to be was way worse in my mind than what was happening. But then again, what was happening was utterly, you know, horrific. There's a scene where they're discussing a policy, right? But that policy is so horrible that your stomach.
It's the scene where they're shooting sort of top down, right?
Yeah.
In the boardroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh my stomach, right? It's just like, this is not a stomach ache. This is not a cramp. This is a physical response to something that you know is just like, I can't compute right now. This is.
Yeah, because here's the thing, right? So what's interesting about this, because I want to speak about Jonathan Glazer's filmography for a second. But what's interesting just within the confines of the conversation that we're having is that his Oscar speech was really interesting. And that's funny enough how I heard about The Zone of Interest. When he went up there and he spoke about, he spoke about our current context of what we find ourselves in.
Oh, yes,
and what we choose to turn a blind eye to. And what's interesting about that was the blowback that he got and how many people came out and just kind of denounced him for doing exactly what the film, sort of is a commentary on.
Yeah.
and it's mind-boggling, Charles, because I can't help but think that have we truly moved on in these last 70 years? And the question that keeps coming back, or have we evolved in the last 70 years? And the answer rather to the question keeps coming back, and it's a fundamental no. We're doing the exact same things. We're swimming in the pools, throwing kids' parties, playing music. Well, people are literally in furnaces all around the world, and it just wakes you up to this feeling that you should be doing more. And to be honest, having watched this before we jump onto this podcast where we talk about video games and film, because we love both of those, I feel somewhat ashamed. Not to say that what we're doing right now isn't worthwhile, because you've been such a great proponent in my life to say that, look, you have to take both of those. There has to be balance, right? There has to be some sort of, or some semblance of the joy and the sorrow, to kind of quote a Khalil Gibran short story. The sorrow burrows deep into your being so that joy may flow through deeper into your being. But and forgive me for my waffling, but it's just because how utterly stunned I am. And I'm trying to find a phrase here to describe what you're talking about in terms of imagining the horror and then to be presented with something seemingly, how shall I say it, mundane. Like a lot of the scenes are mundanities, right? People eating, people playing, people gardening. But then when you see they're kind of gardening with the ashes of human remains,
yeah,
you're not prepared for that level of complacency.
Yeah.
I think that the complacency that sets in with you is the most horrific part of all of it. It's what we spoke about last week when it came to The Last of Us, and one particular thing was, the death animations in The Last of Us, you never really get used to them.
Yeah.
And the horror of that.
And I was about to bring that up just now, but you continue.
Yeah, and you said it so beautifully, where you said, you do all these horrific things, but then you're like, but I'm still a movie star. It's
something else. And we touched upon this last time as well, just in terms of, the mark of good art changes you. Right? Mm-hmm. The idea that art will change the world, I think that's very, very much, it's a fool's errand, right? Because, like you said, in the past 70 years, what progress has there been? However, that feeling, that experience, should you ever come across something even, a decimal of a percentage like this film, your antennas will light up before anybody else who hasn't watched this film. And that's the thing. It's like you watch it, you know, after you've watched it, that I'm not the same. Physically, emotionally, mentally, I'm not the same. Right? And this is why it was good. And I don't think if I knew what this film was about, like you mentioned earlier, just in terms of how you avoid certain topics in films, right? Mm-hmm. I would have, I've been like, nah, peace out. I'll see this film if I see this film when somebody tells me about it. However, the recommendation came in, it worked out. And, I'm definitely grateful that I watched it, but I would not have gone out of my way to watch it. You know how, like, especially after Oscar buzz and all that stuff. And I'm wise to the Oscars just in terms of the films that win, the excellence that these films produce. Great. However, sometimes you're just not ready for it. And you can't necessarily, I wouldn't put myself in that situation, right? I'm not a firefighter. I'm not running towards the fire. It's just, I'm at the very least, I know, like, I don't know what it would take for me to run towards the fire. I don't want to ask that question. So you watch something like The Zone of Interest, and it's like, yo, it's a fire. And should you finish it, and we both did, you end up with this conversation where you're like, yo, my goodness. And what happens is, especially like after a week, 2 weeks, when you start interacting with the world again and you start, right, decompressing, you've got a different filter on, right? And, it's, like you can access that filter whenever you want. Or better said, you notice people who don't have that filter, where you're like, this one's just going about their day. They have no idea what I just experienced, right? And in saying that, we have no idea what the characters in that film experienced. I mean, outside of the backdrop of what was happening, right? I still remember thinking to myself, man, like, these people need to get out. This is not right. And you're terrified for them. And on top of that, you're scared for what comes next. And it's presented in this beautiful, beautiful package that is, a very cinematic film. I'm just like, and I'm very careful as to who I recommend this film to. And it was like you essentially gave me the perfect through ball, the alley-oop, when you were like, Civil War, time to recommend films. And I'm like, I don't have anything on the caliber of Civil War. And I'm just like, wait a minute. That's because they're very different films. Very different films. So I'm like, okay, I'm keen to get his opinion on it. And I didn't want to hype it up. I didn't want to say it's a beautiful film, but I knew that, look, if he watches it, he'll know. He'll know.
Look, I have to say thank you. I have to say thank you because, every film, a lot of people try to rank films, and I think that's always a fool's errand, because I always say that, where films belong in, sort of comparison to one another is right next to each other on a DVD shelf somewhere. Very nice. You don't stack them up, you stack them side by side. And, you have films that are windows and films that are mirrors, and each one has their own beauty. They each have their own veneer to them, and some of them make you look at yourself differently. And as you say, they allow you to come out of it changed somehow. And some others allow you to go on a journey, outside of your own sort of myopic points of view, or outside of your own echo chamber, and, sort of experience something through allegory, whether it's, something in the sci-fi realm or anything like that. That's why both you and I love movies and love video games and love talking about both. And the thing for me is that I've been jumping through a lot of windows, simply because I think that I've been running away from that, despair of reality. sometimes, and sometimes you do require some sort of escapism, and sometimes you do require some reflection. And this was a film that just helped me reflect, not just on the context of the world and kind of be a mouthpiece for my own bias or my own political point of view, but rather just to look at myself and my role in, essentially my purpose as a filmmaker in order to actually, speak truth to power or to say something with my art. So for that, Charles, I say thank you. What a beautiful, harrowing, horrific film, ultimately. But before we get into one of Jonathan Glazer's other films, did you take a look at Civil War?
I have not.
You have not. That's all right. That's all right. Like we said, there are films that you've seen and films that you haven't seen, and that just remains one film that you haven't seen for now.
Yeah.
But the other film from Jonathan Glazer's filmography that really got to me, and I don't want to lie, it's probably the only other one I've watched of his, but very similarly, it got under my skin, and it was Under the Skin with Scarlett Johansson.
I remember going to a screening for that, and back then, I wouldn't consider myself cultured now, but back then I was a hillbilly. So I'm there for popcorn. I'm there for Michael Bay explosions. Will Smith say something funny. You just entertainment, whatever it is, cool. And I would periodically stumble across films that I was not interested in and that were not good. So I don't know, I kind of built up a thick skin. And then Under the Skin, I'm like, okay, Scarlett Johansson. I've followed her films for a long time, for a very long time. Like, it was her and Chris Evans have been in a few films, so it was kind of like this very strange. Actually, I'm keen to see what film she's in now. Basically, it was a curiosity because it wasn't her usual stuff, And then it got weird, man. It got really weird.
At least, you discovered it in some sort of, how shall I say, area of formality and beauty. Me, on the other hand, I just watched Under the Skin because I heard that Scarlett Johansson got her kids off.
Karim, my friend.
Yes, my friend. I saw foot nut. And ankle bone and
ankle cleavage.
Look, I remember seeing Scarlett Johansson in Eight-Legged Freaks. If you remember that,
I do.
Yes, still one of my favorites.
Right?
Yeah, just good old-fashioned, fun. What's his name? David Arquette is great in there. And, it's one of those movies that you would have picked up in the sort of horror section back when there were video stores.
Yeah.
And you'd pick it up and you just go back with your brothers and you'd watch it and you were like, it's a good movie. And, one of your brothers would be like, that girl was really sexy. And you were like, yeah. And you banked that, right? And I remember there was one of my friends whose Scarlett Johansson was like the pinnacle of beauty for him. And we had gone to watch a couple of movies just on the basis of Scarlett Johansson being in that movie. I think one of them was The Island. You speak about Michael Bay?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we watched that movie simply because he was like, Scarlett Johansson's in it, let's go and watch it. And I won't lie, man. Scarlett Johansson had a couple of assets. I mean, acting.
No, man, I completely agree. I was actually
acting assets. I was interested in seeing, and Under the Skin came under my radar. And Mr. Skin said that she got her kid off, and I was like, I would pretend to be an Arthouse debutante, and I will use this as a smokescreen for why anybody, if anyone walks in and asks, "What am I doing?" I'd be like, "This is an Arthouse movie." I will have you know.
I love it.
I'm proud of myself though, Charles. I didn't fast forward. I watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I was so perturbed by it. It got under my skin. It was, you know me, I don't like aliens, especially like sentient kind of looking aliens. I can deal with kind of xenomorphs and those type of things.
Okay.
But as soon as there's something that has sentience and is it's got a certain level of consciousness that it's considering doing horrible things to you, that's when it starts to get a bit scary for me, because I think that's when it starts to become that sort of horrifically human as per the zone of interest. Just it's like, what is your intent? With a xenomorph, it's just there to, stab Bishop through the chest and tear him in half and let milk spray out of him in Aliens. But when it comes to like these, for lack of a better word, she plays a succubi in that film. And
yes,
it just freaks me out.
Yes, very much so. I kind of like your honesty, just in terms of why you watched it, because I mean, a lot of the films that we do watch, we use that compass as a guide as well, just in terms of, personally, I want to watch because of A, B, and C. And then obviously we put on this beautiful mask, this persona, and we're like, yeah, it was a good film, right? With the Island, it was something similar. I was just pleasantly caught off guard because Ewan McGregor, Steve Buscemi, and it's a Michael Bay, action-packed, film.
Yeah.
How it did at the box office, I didn't care. I was like, I actually like this. That caught me off guard. But my reasons for watching it, they were very, very. This is not high brain stuff. I'm
Sometimes
watching.
you like to play in the shadows. It's just like,
I'm watching it for that. Like if I see that pout, let me get a ticket of that pout. That's the
100%. It's the reason I watched Milena. I was like Monica Bellucci, right? And then because the poster for Milena doesn't do it any favors in terms of telling you that this is a deep story. For those wondering, just Google the poster for Milena. You will be watching it, toot sweet. If I'm yeah, you'll be like, add to cart and let's go. And then you're completely thrilled by the narrative of it. You're just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, that one was special.
I showed up for the titties, and I got an education while I was here. It's kind of like that sexy substitute teacher that had something to say.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're like, how do I remember this? Come on.
I will tell you a quick story before we jump back into the Oscars. I remember there was this teacher. There's always that one teacher that all the boys ogle. They always are like, "Oh man, Mrs. von Rensburg."
Yeah.
There's always that one where you're like, "What was the principal thinking when you hired her?"
The same thing we were thinking.
Exactly. And what's funny, my son goes to a school where all the teachers are like that. And I'm like, this principal is a dog. What are all these bimbos doing here? And what's funny? My son does really well in the classes where he has like really good looking teachers. And I'm like, you make daddy proud. But that being said, I remember this one day I showed up late to school. And my friend rolls up to me and he's like, "Oh, you're never going to believe this." And he goes, "We went to Mrs. van Rensburg's house because she forgot her classroom keys at her house." Bro, I walked around that space. I sniffed everything. And till this day, I don't know whether or not he was lying, Charles. he told such a good tale. I was like, how did the whole class fit in that damn car? I was like, this is bullshit. But anyway, it was a much better story. But just to kind of circle back to your point about the Oscars, I tend to avoid Oscar fare for two reasons. So there was a period in my life when GTA 4 came out, right? We were speaking about this through our voice notes, where, I was watching a lot of Arthouse stuff at like Cinema Nouveau because I have an aunt who's like very into that type of stuff. She's sort of my film going buddy, and she would introduce me to different things. And it was very kind of uncomfortable sometimes when we would go watch a film and there was like full on, sex scenes in it or like nudity in it, because I had to pretend that I wasn't interested. I was very much interested. I just looked down at my popcorn box and I was like, these mother effers want to put nudity scenes in these movies that I have to watch with my aunt. But some of them I would have conversations with afterwards, and she's like, this PhD in psychology, so oftentimes we'd get into like a lot of like Jungian theory and different types of things, and we would dissect them, and she would play devil's advocate. So that's the part that I really enjoyed. But after a while we started going to things where I was just like, these films are homework. Like, these films are not enjoyable anymore. And a lot of them were sort of Oscar fare, right? So we'd go and see everything that was kind of on the Oscars watch list. And Cinema Nouveau used to do this thing where they were like, these are the Oscar-nominated films.
Yeah.
Get up to speed before the awards come out. And I started to develop this bitterness because it ceased to be entertaining for me, right? And I know a lot of people argue this, like, well, should it be entertaining or should it move you? And I think that, film inherently is entertaining, right? Even the zone of interest, there's an entertainment quality to it. It's for instance, just to do a bit of a side quest here, I'm currently watching Narcos. I know I'm also late to the game.
I've watched Narcos twice.
Oh, man. But here's the thing that I'm struggling with, because there's an entertainment quality to it, which I'm very much into. Wagner Moura, Pedro Pascal, Boyd Holbrook. That's my jam, man. And to touch on like nudity and something else, there's quite a bit of nudity in that show. But what was interesting is the other day, I'm watching it with Melissa, and she says to me, were you staring at her breasts? And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, she's naked. And I was like, wow, were you staring at her breasts? It's a scene where Pedro Pascal just kind of had sex with this lady of the night. And I was like, no, I was looking at how sexy Pedro Pascal looked in that shot, because he's just kind of standing there topless in his jeans. And I was like, who would stand like that in reality? This is kind of like the verisimilitude of cinema, is that we position people in certain ways, and they do it as well in season 1 with Gustavo and one of the sisters, right? The sister of one of the cartels. And they've just had sex, but they're both facing the camera and they're both delivering dialogue. And, that's staged in a certain way so that we're the third person in that conversation. There's the fourth wall, and we're interacting through that fourth wall. But the thing I struggle with Narcos is anytime they go to the kind of real footage, the aftermath of like all the dead bodies, particularly one that threw me off was when, and spoiler alerts, Pablo like killed 400 policemen a year. And then they show the fallout of that, but the actual real fallout of it. Yeah. And your mind does that same zone of interest thing where you're like, oh, wait a second. What I'm watching really happened.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like this horror really took place. And to come back to my point, and I hope that I'm still following my train of thought, is that with the Oscar stuff, I started to feel like the more morose, the better.
Yes.
Like the more we could kind of cut into the bone and let the marrow spill out, the better for the audience. And at some point it becomes distasteful. At some point, like we spoke about this last week, like nudity becomes distasteful, sex becomes distasteful, and it's just like it starts becoming borderline pornographic or gratuitous in terms of violence, in terms of sex, in terms of sexual violence, in terms of things like that. And for me, I started to almost feel this callous starting to develop with myself.
Oh, that happened with me. Yeah. With it was Khan a few years ago. Tatian. Mm-hmm. That was the film. It did what's that award for Khan? The Palme.
The Palme d'Or.
Palme d'Or, yeah. And so it won the Palme d'Or, and obviously, noise. This is the film. We're in the film space, right? Busy talking with all these people. And I remember watching the trailer and feeling like, I don't think I'm going to like this. I don't care how celebrated it is. I just don't feel like I'm going to like this. And then when I did watch it, I was like, I was right. What was I thinking? My goodness. Mm-hmm. And what you're talking about is, I agree with you.
And look, I'm not making an argument that those type of films shouldn't exist. They clearly have audiences for them, right? I just don't think the barometer of what makes a good film is whether or not you can get as close to gratuity or close to being, sort of overtly pornographic, and then just kind of skate by on your cinematography. It's like I used to make this argument that often Arthouse films is just pornography with better lighting. And it's just like, when that starts to happen, I start to go, no, look, you're just cheating. You're cheating because there's a way to articulate certain things where you could leave it up to the imagination, where you're engaging, where you're having the audience be the active member of the story, and that's entertainment.
Yeah.
That's what I like to call entertainment, and that's why I believe that we love video games, is because you're an active player. And I think that anytime that a video game makes you a passive player, where it's just beating you over the head, it starts to become very much like the propaganda and this kind of engendered push to get you to think something, or get you to take this very sort of blinkered approach to whatever the subject matter of the story. And we mentioned The Last of Us last week, and another, as I was listening to our episode, another game that did this was Spec Ops: The Line, where in this sort of era where like Call of Duty and Battlefield and Medal of Honor were like all the rage, Spec Ops: The Line came out and just did a very similar thing that The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 did, where they were like, oh, you like war? And it was very much like Apocalypse Now versus, some sort of gung-ho Black Hawk Down type film.
Yeah, I remember Spec Ops. I remember it very, very well. I got Spec Ops from you, my friend. And,
yes.
And I was like, great. Let me blast through this because, he asked for my opinion. And towards the end of the game, when things start getting psychedelic, you're like, no. And, mechanics wise, I was like, yeah, it's a shooter, right? Mm-hmm. But then you're like, yeah, I can see why this is not flying off the shelf.
yeah. It's like I think the best way to kind of contextualize it is that Andrew Garfield said this after the Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out, and they weren't moving ahead with Amazing Spider-Man 3, and he said, it depresses me because he loved this character so much. And they asked him, I think he was on Ellen DeGeneres, if I'm not mistaken, and she asked him like, why are you so depressed? And he's like, I believe that blockbuster films can mass vaccinate so many people. You can deliver so much medicine through the modicum or through the vehicle of a great selling film, or even by extension, a video game. I think that you can have a teachable moment within that. And I think it's when the mix gets kind of fuzzy and the alchemy is not quite there that you lose people, because it tastes too much like medicine sometimes. You can taste the castor oil instead of the sugar. And I think you've got to kind of have a good blend, of the two, and then, create some sort of scissor that the masses can get addicted to. But that being said, I find that a lot of the times Oscar films and Oscar baity films are very much agendaed to sort of one spectrum, one part of the spectrum of the sort of propaganda sometimes. It's kind of what, sort of the populist Hollywood ideology is.
Yeah, but this is the criticism they've been getting for the past 10, 12 years, where, it's just like, wait a minute, these millionaires are basically trying to tell people what to think, and you're just like, that's not why you get paid millions. It's just, so obviously you see the ratings, slowly, steadily, just, dwindling. And it's what do they call it when you stop caring? What's that word? It will come to
apathy.
Apathy. It's way past the first stage now. People they stop caring. They stop caring.
And what's funny about the dialogue, right, on either side of the spectrum is that it's kind of like Dr. Evil and Scotty. It's just like, hey, Scotty, I'm cool. Look, tucka. He's like, I don't care, Dad.
Yes.
And what's interesting to me is because, speaking about agendas, speaking about, the zone of interest, and speaking about essentially, sort of films with teeth versus films without, and films that kind of pander towards, sort of the more snowflake inclined versus films that are just kind of more medicine than they are sugar. This is Stories of the Games We Play. We're now in episode 2, and I spoke quite a lot last week, given that I was kind of decompressing from finishing The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah.
I want to get your opinions on the state of Star Wars. Because there's a couple of thoughts that I have, but really, what I see in terms of kind of if the Oscars is kind of like Dr. Evil, some of the dissenting voices out there are kind of like the Scotties, right?
Yeah.
And we're sitting in between, like Will Ferrell's Mustafa, just kind of watching this go on. So what are your thoughts, good sir? What is the state of Star Wars?
The state of Star Wars, the whole enchilada.
Well, look, allow me to say this. Allow me to give the context. There was a golden age of Lucasfilm and LucasArts. So, allow me to kind of preface this by saying there was kind of like this premium era where kind of the Empire Strikes Back was the greatest thing since sliced bread. It really inspired geekdom for 20 odd years. Then we got
Golden Age.
Yeah, the Golden Age. And we got the prequels, right? And the excitement was fever pitch for the prequels. And then, the Phantom Menace came out, and it kind of came out to a bit of a soppy affair. I didn't mind it too much. I didn't particularly like the kid Jake, I felt like. And, the whole Jar Jar Binks with things was a kind of sore point for me. But in retrospect, and thinking of it as a kid's movie and George Lucas really positioning it as a kid's movie for a new generation of kids, I was like, okay, fine. And then I didn't mind Attack of the Clones. I didn't mind Revenge of the Sith. I think that the parts was greater than the sum, allow me to say that, because there's some really memorable moments in there. Duel of the Fates in the Phantom Menace.
Oh yes.
Darth Maul. You get to that last fight with Count Dooku. and Yoda. The lightsaber battles were really, you were seeing sort of what your imagination really thought Star Wars was. Revenge of the Sith for me is a superior film as far as the prequels are concerned. And really, what I really love about the prequels is that they gave us modern movie making technology. I wouldn't be the filmmaker that I am today with the likes of Adobe Premiere, because that's really when it was birthed, right? Adobe Premiere and digital filmmaking was birthed by way of George Lucas really developing those tools. So I'm grateful for that. But the real thing for me that I really celebrate was the gaming era thereafter. It was phenomenal. You spoke about Knights of the Old Republic. I haven't played that. I would really like you to dig into that, because this is my preface to the state of Star Wars currently. Their biggest mistake is that they did away with the extended universe.
Look, with Star Wars, for myself personally, I watched Star Wars a bit later in my teens. And I was surprised that I enjoyed it, because I'm like, it's an old movie, I don't think I'm going to enjoy it, but it's Star Wars, I gotta watch it. So I watch it, right, the first two, and I'm like, oh, yo, this is mine now. This is solid. I get why people like this, right? I have issues with the teddy bears taking out stormtroopers. I can't get over that. Right, so
I love Ewoks. Right. I said last week that Abby was right. So I already, probably have people with pitchforks and torches showing up at my house, but I don't mind the Ewoks. And look, I watched Star Wars when I was much younger, so that's probably why.
Okay, I see. Yeah, because even now, what happens is you got like hardcore Star Wars fan. I'm a Star Wars fan, but I'm not hardcore. Right, but I'm knowledgeable. I enjoy it thoroughly because, like you said, the extended universe, the books, the games. You're like, oh, there's more to Star Wars than those first three, and you'll get hardcore Star Wars fans, right? Grown ass men trying to talk me into believing that these teddy bears could do what they did. I can't do it. I just can't do it. Like, with the time in which I watched it, a part of my brain was developed enough to go, I know we make fun of stormtroopers, but teddy bears, that's where I draw the line. However, right, we fast forward to the prequels, and like you said, that excitement was enough to carry me through all three, right? The whole Jar Jar Binks thing, I didn't give a damn. I'm like, why is this such a big deal? Like, it's Star Wars is here, and Liam Neeson, McGregor. I didn't particularly like the kid, just in terms of like I was not interested in like a child protagonist. This happens a lot with like certain shonen anime and mangas, where you look at the protagonist and it's like a 16, 17-year-old kid in high school, and you're like, oh boy, I'm not the target audience for this. And then they surprise you, right? Where you're like, wow, okay, I can see why this thing is that good. That did not happen with Star Wars The Phantom Menace. However, as the films progress, there are a lot of things that I enjoyed from those films that made me forgive their shortcomings, right? So whenever people get up in arms about the prequels, I'm like, nah, they're still good. I'm there with George and all other fans, because like you said, there was other things that kept fueling my love for Star Wars, in particular the games. And the first time I played Knights of the Old Republic, I was so shocked. I was so surprised, because I didn't know genres per se back then, right? Because it's an RPG, right? And I love my RPGs. I'm there. So to discover, RPG elements, I'm like, wait, is that a character creation? I'm like, this is impossible. This is for Star Wars. Interesting. And I get into maybe 3, 4, 5 hours into the game, and I'm completely immersed. I can hear the sounds. I remember the cities, the location, some of the difficult areas that I had to go through. Where you're just like, damn it, I should have saved. There's a whole memory bank of emotions that's just fueling my love for this thing. And I was like, what do you mean you don't like Star Wars? And obviously now in hindsight, it's because I had really, really good experiences. And what was nice about Star Wars in that time period of the prequels and the originals was that you could easily go, yeah, this is good, this is crap, and move on, right? Then we get to this era now of the what was that JJ trilogy? It was JJ, Rian Johnson, and JJ again, right? JJ,
that's right.
Yeah. That how do I call it? It was a shit show. I was so excited, right? And after the hype died down, and I'm like, I do not want to rewatch this shit. I can watch the prequels again. I have. There's that whole hour-long romance picnic scene with Padme and Anakin, where I'm just like, what is going on? Why am I watching this? But I watched it, right? I'm like, it's fine.
I distinctly remember where I was when I was watching that scene. It is so funny because I think that was just kind of at the advent of, sort of digital piracy. And I remember I got a copy of Windows XP, right? A pirated copy of Windows XP, and I think it was like 2 discs of Attack of the Clones. So the movie would pause, and then you'd have to put in the other disc.
Okay.
And I was installing Windows XP while watching that scene, and I distinctly remember that I was sitting in the dining room because I had it on the television, and I had this old CRT monitor in front of me installing Windows XP, and it was taking so long to install. It was taking hours to install. And what's interesting about it now is that I rewatched the prequels with my son. Right?
Yeah.
I haven't got to Revenge of the Sith yet because I want him to actually say, hey, I want to watch it. So whenever he asked me, hey, remember like we watched The Phantom Menace? He's like, can we watch the next one? And then we watched Attack of the Clones. And what's fascinating about it is I watch him watching it, and I go, whilst I was possibly more cynical when I was watching it back then, I watch it now and I'm like, they're fine. They're fine films, because for him, he hasn't watched the original trilogy. In actual fact, I think there's a kind of barrier to entry for him, particularly, simply because he falls out as soon as kind of like the age of the film starts to show itself.
Yeah.
It's not like that with me, because I think that I have some sort of context, but for him, he's like, this is slightly, there's slightly hokey elements to it, which he can't quite get into. But he's kind of entry into Star Wars is The Phantom Menace, it is Attack of the Clones, and McGregor is great in there, and Liam Neeson's though, Liam Neeson's is always good. Liam Neeson's though, and there's also who else is in there? I mean, Jimmy Smith shows up at some point, to play General Organa, and I was a big fan of Jimmy Smith's, and there's a couple other elements into there. I mean, you've got Christopher Lee in there playing Count Dooku. General Grievous is quite a fascinating character.
Oh, that guy's amazing, especially in animations. I was like, yo, more of this.
Absolutely, and there's there's still, I think it doesn't pack as much bite as the originals, but it still has teeth. But here's two things that you mentioned that I want to kind of ask you about, right? So when you watched the first original trilogy, you said something really interesting. You said, it's mine now. And I think that's how a lot of people feel about Star Wars. I feel about any type of popular media that resonates with them. And this is my argument as to why Disney made, I know that why they made the choice to do away with the extended universe in terms of the comic books, in terms of the lore. You've got like maybe 30 years of lore that you kind of have to respect in order to kind of investigate it in the new trilogy of films. And it was a fool's errand to try and kind of decipher where all these storylines were laying. I understand that from a logical point of view, but I understand also that you do that, right? And it's as if they think they're holding that MIB stick with authors, where they're just like, this doesn't exist anymore. And I feel like Hollywood does that a lot now, because I think with the success of something like Batman Begins, every single time they reboot a franchise, they seem to think that the previous memories of that franchise just disappear in our heads. And it's so funny because I've seen a couple of fine films, like they're solid films that I didn't particularly enjoy, and I've realized that perhaps I'm not the audience for them. But I've always felt that those films, the parts are greater than the sum of those films. And the Star Wars new sequels, right? These new Daisy Ridley sequels suffer from that as well. Where I'm like, if you look at the talent that's involved in it, if you look at the costs, and if you look at like the resources that they have, you go, well, hold on a second. Why is this not congealing in the way that it should? And there's one reason that I think so, but I want to hear what your reason is.
Yeah, you see, you're being very, very polite.
Uh-oh. Is this the part of the episode where Charles tears Star Wars a new one? Be sure to check out part 2 of this episode, available on my YouTube page. Be sure to hit subscribe for more stories of the games we play.